Hi, everyone, and welcome to Tales from the Heart. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you a portrayal of an actual survivor of that tragic maritime disaster, the sinking of the Titanic. This is a true story. The gentleman's going to share it with you as it happened. As always, I would like to remind you to like and comment, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel. But as we go to the story today, picture yourself on a beach in Nova Scotia, and the character is sitting on a beach. So join me now for How Cold Was the Water? Uh, the ocean behind me is very choppy today. The North Atlantic, she's gray and choppy today on this April 15th, 1917. Uh, as I stand here on a beach in Nova Scotia, and I look out over the North Atlantic in the direction of England, I can tell you that 5 years ago, the ocean looked nothing like that. It's much, much calmer. How do I know that? Because 5 years ago, this very day, I was out upon that ocean. I was part of that great maritime disaster, the sinking of the Titanic. I was a passenger on that epic voyage, and it is nothing short of miraculous that I could be here today and share my story. I've come back to this beach 5 years later because I just wanted to be as close as I could to the event and just sit here on the beach and look out and remember. My name is Peter Daly, and how did I come to be on the Titanic? Well, when I was a young man, graduated from university in Cambridge, England, my father said I should see a bit of the world before I settled down. So he bought me a ticket to South America. I made it as far as Lima, Peru. And there I met the most beautiful girl in the world, Ramona Ramos, and we fell in love. And we were married. Now, Ramona did not want to leave her family. She didn't want to move to my cold, damp island of England, and that would be way too far from her family. So we agreed to set up our lives in Peru. I got a job working for a stockbroker company, Hayes and Son, based out of London, and we settled into domestic life. Now, it's been a very good marriage for us over the years. We have 9 children. It's been a very good marriage. Every 2 or 3 years, I would return to England, to London precisely, to visit the offices of Hayes and Son and to get caught up on the latest trends and also to get some new apparel. We have good tailors in Peru, but nothing matches those that I find in London. And so it was of April of 1912 that I found myself just finishing up a business trip to London. And like everybody else, I was kind of caught up in all the hoopla of the maiden voyage of the Titanic. Now, my plan was simple. I planned to take the Titanic from England to New York City. My oldest son, Nick, had recently moved to New York City and taken employment there. So my plan was to visit him there and then proceed on to Lima, Peru. So hence my reason for being on the Titanic. Now, the White Star Line had spared no expense in advertising for this maiden voyage of the Titanic to be her greatest ship ever, the White Star Line said. The best they've ever built, the smoothest sailing, the most luxurious, and the ad said practically unsinkable. practically unsinkable. And so I decided that I would treat myself, and I bought a first-class passage ticket on the Titanic. 26 pounds, 11 shillings I paid, which is, I know, a little exorbitant, but I thought, I'm worth it. And so it was that on Wednesday, April the 10th of 1912, I found myself on the docks, Southampton, looking up at the hugest ship I had ever seen. I mean, the Titanic stood 11 stories tall. She was as long as 4 city blocks. She had 4 majestic smokestacks, of which actually only 3 worked. One was completely fake. It was added for aesthetics to balance things out, if you will. As I stood there looking at this mighty, mighty ship, it looked big. It looked almost too big. Now, as I stood there on the dock that morning waiting to board, I met a family, the Harts. Now, the Harts were traveling on the Titanic. Their destination was Winnipeg, Canada, where Mr. Hart planned to open a tobacco shop. So it was Mr. and Mrs. Hart, Ben and Esther, and a delightful little girl by the 7-year-old Eva. And oh, Eva was just a delight, just a delight. But as we talked, I come to find out that the Titanic was not the original ship that the Harts had bought and passage on. If you remember 5 years ago in London, there was a coal strike and a shortage of coal. And so the White Star Line wanted to make sure they had enough coal for the Titanic. So they canceled some of their other liners and pulled their coal sources that they had for the ship for the maiden voyage. As a result, the Harts' tickets were transferred to the Titanic. Now, Mrs. Hart was very dubious. She didn't like the idea of being on a ship that had never, on a maiden voyage, had never really been tested. As we stood there talking, one of the Titanic's dockhands went by, and Mrs. Hart asked him, she says, "Excuse me, sir," she says, "is this ship really safe?" He said, "Ma'am, even God himself couldn't sink this ship." Did not relieve her fears. One should not tempt the Lord. But it soon became time to board. As I was traveling first class and the Harts were traveling second class, we parted ways, and they would board by a separate entrance. Made my way up the gangplank, was met at the top of the gangplank by a steward. He gave me a flower for my lapel. I was taken to my room, which was a delightful small stateroom decorated in the Jacobean style. I had a bed, a table and chair, a washstand, an armoire, although I did have to share the water closet with another passenger. Excuse me, probably shouldn't use that word in polite company, but all in all, it was very, of course, it was brand new, and everything was most luxurious. All around, the entire Titanic was just amazing, gorgeous, brand new. Again, the staircase reminded you of something out of like Versailles or one of those European castles, and everything, white wicker furniture, just everything was incredulous. It was just wonderful. Now, precisely at noon, we got underway. 3 sharp blasts on the ship's whistle, and we were underway. There was no really big ceremony. Some friends standing on the dock waving to us, but other than that, we were underway. We nearly had a disaster before we even got out of the harbor. See, the Titanic was such a huge ship that it made such a big wake that it actually washed up against a smaller ship docked nearby, the New York, and it broke loose from its moorings and was drifting right into our path. And only some very sharp maneuvering on the part of the crew helped prevent a disaster right there in the harbor. But all that was soon forgotten as we were called to our first meal on board, to that wonderful trumpet piece, the roast beef of Old England. Now, I will tell you, the food aboard the Titanic was amazing. I mean, breakfast was my favorite meal. It always has been. I and every breakfast food you can imagine was on that buffet. In addition, one of the things I love is oatmeal. Now, a lot of people don't, but I do. And I tell you, that oatmeal on the Titanic was the most amazing I'd ever had. Matter of fact, it said right on the menu, the name of the company that made it. It was called Quaker Oats. Later, I did a little research when I got home, and I found out that the Quaker Oat Company is in a small company in a small town in Ohio, in the United States, Akron, I believe it is. Uh, Probably nobody ever hears of that, but the Quaker Oats were very, very good. Lunch was everything from mutton chops to fried potatoes to vegetables to salads. But of course, the dinners were amazing: filet mignon, duck, chicken, fish, every vegetable, every potato imaginable, salads, and for dessert, eclairs and pies and even ice cream. So we certainly ate like kings on the Titanic. Now we crossed the English Channel. We spent the night in Cherbourg, France. A few people got on, a few people got off. The next morning, we departed France, sailed across, and made a stop in Queenstown, Ireland. Picked up some mail and other thing. Again, a few people got on, a few people got off. And then from there, Queenstown, Ireland, it was off across the North Atlantic, perhaps to set a new world speed record for the crossing of the North Atlantic. He said that exactly, but I think it was on the back of everybody's mind. I quickly settled into life on board the Titanic, and it was wonderful, wonderful. As a first class passenger, I sat out. We had our own promenade deck, and it was wonderful to watch the various people walk by. I was especially delighted to watch the newlyweds. There must have been, I'm told, a dozen honeymoon couples on board the Titanic. And it was so nice to see them walking around the deck, holding hands and being so much in love. It was wonderful. Although I did wonder, if you're on your honeymoon, why are you outside of your cabin? But they did enjoy their walks on the deck. There was a swimming pool full of salt water where you could have a swim for 25 cents. But my favorite activity was the steam room. For only $1, I received a clean white towel and could relax in the steam room from 2 to 6 p.m. every day. Those were the hours for the men. Ladies, you had your own hours in the morning. So it was, again, very, very relaxing. In evenings, I would spend playing cards in the gentleman's lounge, maybe reading in the library. There was an 8-piece orchestra that serenaded us. Oftentimes, they broke up into 2 4-piece sections, but all the music that they made was absolutely, absolutely wonderful, wonderful. Just the most relaxing time on board. Now, that brings us to Sunday, April the 14th. Began with church service, and the captain preached a very good message that morning. Oh, I should tell you about the captain. The captain's name was Edward John Smith. Captain Smith was a long time employee of the White Star Line. Matter of fact, he was retiring, and he was finished, and the White Star Line convinced him to make one final voyage as captain of the Titanic. They wanted someone with experience, and so he agreed to make one final voyage. Wonderful, wonderful man. I met him the second night out. I also met that second night out a wonderful young lady. I had dinner. She sat at our table, her and her mother. Young lady's name was Dorothy Gibson. Dorothy was an American. She was an actress. in the film business. Now, she and her mother had been to Europe on holiday. She was traveling with her mother, all properly chaperoned, of course. And now they were returning to America, where she hoped to resume her film career. But two very, very nice individuals. I enjoyed sharing dinner with them that night. Well, anyway, back to Sunday morning. After a wonderful message by the captain, we did notice one thing that was different. Usually it is procedure, protocol, whatever you want to call it. After Sunday morning services, there was a lifeboat drill. But this particular day on the Titanic, one was not held. I remarked about this to a fellow passenger, but we decided that, well, perhaps it was because it was the maiden voyage and everything had been checked out. And so, for whatever reason, there was no lifeboat drill that day. That Sunday was a very beautiful afternoon. And then in the afternoon, the temperature took a very sharp drop. I bet it dropped about 30 degrees within an hour. We were entering the iceberg fields of the North Atlantic. But again, nobody's concerned because, again, the Titanic is practically unsinkable. That night after dinner, I read in the library, and at about 11:30 p.m., I decided to retire for the evening. I had just returned to my stateroom and was proceeding to get ready for bed when I heard this scraping sound. It was a scraping, almost a groaning sound that went on for several seconds. In fact, the entire ship just shook. And then the engines went silent. Now, I knew this was certainly not normal, so I proceeded to return to the deck to see what was going on. As I went out onto the promenade deck for the first class, nobody seemed concerned. People were walking around a little bit, but a steward was walking by. And I pulled him aside and I said, why have the engines stopped? He said, oh, Mr. Daly, nothing to worry about at all. We have merely brushed an iceberg. Merely brushed it. Shouldn't delay us more than a few minutes, and then we'll be back underway. Nothing to worry about. As a matter of fact, if you look down on the lower deck, you can see there are actually chunks of ice down there. And when I looked over on the second class, third class deck, there was indeed pieces of ice from an iceberg. Some of the lads were actually kicking it around in a game of football. And even in first class, as I walked by the library, or the card room rather, gentlemen were in there. They were just nonchalant. One gentleman said, oh, bring me some of that iceberg ice for my drink. I've never had iceberg in my drink before. So again, nobody was worried. But I just didn't feel right. So I decided to make a circuit of the ship. Just walk around the deck. When I got to the far side of the Titanic, imagine my surprise when they were beginning to uncover the lifeboats, swing them out over the side. Again, Mr. Daly, nothing to worry about, just a mere precaution. Well, by the time I completed the entire circuit of the Titanic, I realized that, well, the ship was beginning to tilt. The deck was actually tilting. And I knew I had some preparations to attend to. So I returned to my stateroom and I proceeded to layer up several layers of clothes, long underwear, trousers, excuse me. I shouldn't use the word underwear in mixed company, but that's what I wore. Sweater, coat, heavy overcoat, and my life jacket. Well, when I returned to the deck, it was tilting even more. And they were beginning to put women and children into the lifeboats. But nobody wanted to go. They weren't really concerned. I heard more than one mother or wife saying to the husband, well, why do we want to go sit out in a cold, wet lifeboat for a couple hours and then just come back in? We know everything's safe. why should we do that? And the fathers and the husband are going, just it's okay, dear. Just go ahead, humor me. Go out there. We'll make sure everything's safe, and then we'll rejoin in a couple of hours. So that is one of the big reasons why some of the lifeboats were not clear full. Nobody wanted to go, but the deck continued to tilt. People didn't realize that we were in trouble, I think, until about 1 o'clock in the morning. And that's when the officers set off the distress rockets, red and white flares going up into the sky. And that's when people realized that the Titanic was in great danger. And that's also when the panic set in. There was a lot of pushing and shoving to get into those remaining lifeboats. Now, I tell you, there's been rumors over the years that the crew was not nice, shots were fired, this sort of thing. I never saw any of that. I want you to know that absolutely every crew member I encountered on the Titanic, whether they survived or not, they were absolutely professional up until the very end. So again, rumors may get started. I'm just telling you what I saw. So it has now become clear that the Titanic is sinking, and I have made my peace to go down with the ship as any good gentleman would do. I am standing there at the railing, and the water is coming up, and I am trying to decide, what do I want to do? Do I want to jump over the railing out into the water, risk being pulled down by the suction of the ship as it sank? Or should I just stay there and let the water come up and just sort of wash me away? I hadn't decided yet when a young woman came running up to me, all in a panic. She's saying, "Sir, save me, please save me." I said, "Madam, only God can save you now." But I did something. I took off my life vest and I put it on her. I tied it to her. She got up on the railing and she jumped. I never saw her again. Was that an act of chivalry on my part? Not really. I mean, I knew once we hit that cold water, it wasn't going to make much of a difference whether you had a life jacket or not. You weren't going to last very long, as cold as that water was. But if it made her feel better, all right. So now I'm standing there again at the railing. The water's coming up more and more. And I don't have a life jacket. That's all right. Still trying to decide, do I want to jump or just be swept away? When the first miracle of the evening happened. Behind me, I heard a huge crash. And all of a sudden, there was like a wall of water came up behind me, lifted me up, and thrust me out into the North Atlantic, quite a ways from the ship. I actually missed the vacuum as it sucked things down. Now, in reading research since then, I've come to figure out what happened. It was at that point that one of the smokestacks, the funnels, one of the real ones, broke from the strain. And as it broke, it fell and it struck the water behind me, struck the deck and the water behind me, creating, for want of a better word, a tidal wave of water, which came up and swept me out into the North Atlantic. Oh, when I hit that water, oh, it was so cold. I cannot describe to you how cold that water was. It took my breath away. It sucked the very life out of me. I mean, I couldn't even breathe. It was like needles, the cold instantly attacking every part of my body. It's like I just froze, no pun intended. It just was oh, it was terrible. The worst cold I have ever felt in my life, the sharpest pain. It was brutal, brutal. I immediately began to sink. I realized that part of the problem was my very heavy overcoat was getting quickly waterlogged. And so I struggled out of that. Probably couldn't have done that if I'd still had my life jacket. But once I was free of that overcoat, I was lighter somewhat. And I was able to float on my back without sinking. So I lay there floating on my back and I'm looking up at the heavens. By the way, that night, there was not a trace of the moon in the sky. The only light, the entire light, was starlight. The water was smooth, but as I lay there and I'm drifting, I'm looking up at the stars and I can just feel the life essence draining out of me. It's just, I am just literally, every life force is just draining away. I don't have long to live. I began to maybe even hallucinate. I'm making peace with my Lord. I am ready to die. That is when the second miracle occurred. As I'm drifting there on my back, looking up at the sky, I don't know where I'm going, I drift right into the side of a lifeboat. Lifeboat number 5, to be exact, which was only partially filled. And they pulled me inside of the lifeboat number 5. And I was rescued. Listen, the lifeboat was maybe only half full. Water in the bottom of it. But it was floating. I was saved. Praise be to God. I turned around because I wanted to see the lights of the Titanic. I wanted to see my ship. And it was gone. There was no lights. There was no anything. There was no shape, anything. The Titanic had completely sank. So quickly. It was just, the water was, it was like the ship had never been. I just stood there. I sat there rather, and I was just in shock at how quickly that ship had disappeared. This is the end of part 1. So I invite you to please join me for part 2. You'll find a link to part 2 in the description. So please join me and we'll continue to see what happened to Peter Daly.